these cuts make a difference in people's lives. You know, if you look at the budget that passed through the House, there are major cuts to Head Start, there are major cuts to WIC, there are major cuts to the EPA, the FDA. I mean, I want to see the deficit go down. Everyone can agree on that, but I don't want that to come at the cost of our air, of our food, of our basic safety regulations.
Now, Andrew, I know you were just shaking your head when Alicia said she wants to see the deficit go down. How large a portion of every dollar that I pay in taxes goes to paying the interest on the debt for government borrowings of the past? They're not taking my dollar and able to spend 100% of that money on things that the government has to do right now, right?
Right now, it's actually very low.
Well, what's
net
very
interest
low?
is about $200 billion out of a $3.7 billion budget. It's inconsequentially low because interest rates are incredibly low because of the financial crisis.
Well, is it a dime? Is it a quarter? I mean, how much of that dollar is going to pay the interest on previously borrowed money?
You're looking at about 4 cents
Really?
right now. It's very low. If you look out over a 10-year window and unsustainable budget policies continue, it balloons. You're looking at close to $1 trillion worth of interest payments, maybe 20% out by 2021. And that's a real problem.
Well, that's a sizable amount of money. All right,
it crowds out.
So we can't keep borrowing forever into the future the way we've been borrowing.
And I am not going to say that we don't face a real problem. We face a monumental budget problem. We have an economy-wide problem of spiraling healthcare costs that exceed GDP growth. That alone will bankrupt the public sector, every household, and the federal government, let alone state and local budget governments, if it goes unaddressed. That's a huge problem. We have a legacy of unsustainable tax policies from a decade ago that we're continuing. There are major problems, but the problem is not today. And policymakers are doing a very poor job differentiating between a necessary near-term budget deficit and extremely problematic long-term budget deficits. We need to pivot to a long-term deficit solution. But cutting $61 billion from this year's non-defense discretionary budget does nothing. The only argument that you could make to say that cutting money now creates jobs is an argument that somehow cutting spending now convinces the bond market that we're fiscally responsible, interest rates fall, people invest more, jobs are created. Interest rates are so low, you're not going to see any drop. The bond market's also smarter than John Boehner. There's no fooling the bond market on this issue. What you're going to see is you're going to see around 700,000 jobs lost. Everyone agrees, from the Federal Reserve, Goldman Sachs, Moody's Analytics, Economic Policy Institute, the Republican budget means at least hundreds of thousands of jobs lost. We don't face a deficit crisis, we face a jobs crisis. And these budget cuts move the dial on unemployment unequivocally in the wrong direction. There's a balancing point, but we're not there yet. Moving to fiscal retrenchment, austerity too soon, endangers the economic recovery.
And more of the hot center of this argument, and it's a national argument, is whose interests are we looking out for? Are we looking out for the people that your members work to help? Or are we looking for the people who are always telling us, hey, I pay the bills? There are a lot of Americans who are paying what they perceive as a lot of taxes. And they're saying, I want to pay less, or at least be sure that the money I'm paying is being well spent. And then there are people who are at the receiving end of services saying, it makes no sense to cut me. Isn't that the crux of it right there?
It is, and I think the federal budget conversation is really inaccessible to most communities and most Americans. I think it's a very complex process and it's a very complex budget. But there are government programs out there that are working and doing a really good job of engaging Americans not only in building skills and pathways to work, but also helping to fill the gap of the services that have been cut at the state and local level. And I think we have to be able to differentiate which government programs are working and actually need investment to be able to spur the economy, and which are not working and need to be discontinued. And I think that needs to be a very honest conversation that takes into account the points of view of people on the ground, many of whom are ordinary Americans, low-income Americans who are making a tremendous difference and helping out their fellow citizens